Hi, everybody. It's Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today is Monday, October 29th, and I'm sitting down to record my overview for the month of November. So today we're going to look at the most important or perhaps the most dynamic astrological transits for next month, the month of November 2018. This month, October, as it's winding down, has been a heck of a month. There's been a lot of powerful astrology just in the past week, and so I think it's worth quickly revisiting some of what's happened in the past week before moving forward into November. I've been out of town last Wednesday through Sunday, seeing my mom and my sister. I took my daughter down to Florida. My mom was attending a medical conference in Florida, so we went and stayed with her in her hotel room, and my sister and I and my daughter Virginia went exploring during the daytime and had a lot of fun. While I was there, I was also writing all of my horoscope columns for November and preparing all of so these talks that I do, just so that people know, I prepare everything that I'm going to talk about in the next month, for the most part, toward the last week or so of the month. And then we put out all of the horoscope written columns. We put out short videos on all of the sun signs, an overview of the month ahead, like we're doing today. And then throughout the month, I also focus in doing individual videos and written horoscopes on just about everything that's a line item in my monthly overview. So this is just so you know, if you're someone who reads and follows my stuff, I get a lot of questions at the end of the month like, hey, you're not around as much. And usually that's because things will die down the end of the month a little bit, because I'm usually preparing everything for the month ahead. So at any rate, last week was nutso. Let me just go back and just give you a sense of what was happening last week. And you have to forgive me in terms of not being an aficionado on world news. I don't pay a lot of attention to the news channels for my own personal reasons. I find them very stressful, and my own philosophical journey with yoga has also taught me that in some ways there's nothing new under the sun. I'm politically engaged, but I'm not someone who I got a lot of emails over the past week asking, how this correlates, how the astrology correlates to everything happening in the world right now. And there's some astrologers that are actually really, really good at observing the correlations between the archetypal unfoldings of the planets and like global level news. For me, I usually pay attention to sort of front page headlines, maybe a little bit of what's going on in the greater world. Maybe I should be more informed than I am. But that's sort of where I'm at with the news. And so you won't hear me commenting usually on much more than what I see happening in the headlines. That's very obvious as a manifestation of the planetary archetypes. But you will hear me talking a lot more about how individuals and our interpersonal journey may be responding or reflected by the planetary transits. That's where more of my focus goes. If you're someone who's interested in global astrology, I would really pay attention to the work of people like Richard Tarnas, who's a really fantastic astrologer that does a lot of work correlating the outer planetary movements with major changes happening sort of in the larger or broader collective. So I mentioned that first because I received several questions about that. But in terms of U.S. news, it's where I live. I live in Washington, D.C., so it's easy to pay attention to what's happening like right here. In U.S. news, of course, it was a big week with a bunch of public shootings again. And there's, if you look back last week, the big thing that happened about the middle of the week was the new moon, or the full moon, conjoining with the planet Uranus opposite Venus retrograde. That was an intense moment, because basically what happened was we saw those huge amount of the domestic terrorism with the mailings and the pipe bombs and all of that, and then see the synagogue shootings and the shootings in Florida, there was another series of shootings. Someone almost got into a church and then didn't. It was killed somebody at a grocery store or something. So all of this, and I get so many emails from people saying like, what is doing it? What's doing it? And for one thing, I know this is going to sound trite, but like on a very basic level, like human evil is doing it. Like we're all capable of, we all have the shadow that lives within us, right? The polarities of good and evil in this world there's a constant kind of cycling going on between them. And so just the potential for human evil has, that's where it comes from. And we shouldn't be altogether surprised as mystics by the moral decay in front of us. There's an interesting documentary that I started watching. I have to finish watching it. It was a documentary about wealth and greed and money, basically. And it was comparing the like proliferation of like a materialist mindset in the United States with the last days of Rome, before Rome fell. And I thought it was really interesting. I can't remember the name of it, and it was on Netflix or something, and I have to go back and check it out. But so the very most basic answer is that astrologers in ancient times, astrologers looked at the nature of time as cyclical. So when astrologers looked at, history in a sense, it wasn't a linear evolutionary paradigm where everything is progressing and becoming, more evolved. Rather, the material universe is, you could say, it's seen as something that goes through cycles. It's more like a circle. It repeats through light ages and dark ages and light ages and dark ages and expansion and contraction, and it goes in circles like that. So ancient astrologers believe that life in the human world goes through similar cycles of good and then evil, and then having a lot of something and then having a little of something, or being hungry and then being full and then being hungry, and then, so these opposites are always just fluctuating in a circle. And this was something that was demonstrated for me during my years of work with ayahuasca, where patterns in the human mind and the human body and nature and the cosmos were all shown to me in these ceremonies as patterns fluctuating through the cycling of opposites. That's a very primary level experience that people have when they take a serious psychedelic journey. You see this very readily. It's just like an obvious part of the experience. And so when we think about the way that ancient astrologers would have looked at, some of the difficulties that we've been faced with in the news in the past week, in some ways, the spiritual fruit of the astrological practice comes when we're in such moments and we can observe with empathy and humanity, but also a level of detachment, knowing that these cycles are a part of what this material world is. This is how it works, and different names for it in different traditions like samsara and nirvana, or samsara and Maya. This realm is a bit like, we stopped in at the Magic Kingdom while I was down in Florida. And as I was going through this theme park, this Disney theme park with my daughter, I was like, oh, this is like a little microcosmic view of Maya, right? Rides that go round and round that excite the senses, all the smells, all the sugar, all the things that you can buy, like all of this stuff. And don't get me wrong, I was trying not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but you're taking it in and you're like, this is people are they come into this park, we come into the world in our bodies and very much excited about all of the different things we can do. But at the end of the day, we have to leave the theme park. We have to leave our bodies, and the journey continues. And so the real idea of spiritual evolution has to do with the quality of the questions we start asking about why we're here and what the larger purpose of material life is in general, or what the larger purpose of our lives as spirit souls, not just as material bodies, are. And that's always been a part of astrology. So that's the trite answer to why these things happen. It's not the planets causing them to happen. It's that this is what this realm is all about. This happens every day, in fact, all over the world. It's one of the reasons I have trouble watching the news, is because again, this is the beat that everyone follows. It's too bad that they don't have a little bit more of the joyful side of things in the news, because there's also a lot of happiness and joy happening all the time, all around us. But the basic truth is that these sort of malefic influences, these difficult shadow elements of material life have always been around. So that's the way that I look at these things. But in terms of the astrology, of course, middle of the week last week, we had this big full moon conjoined the explosive, unpredictable, shocking, and disruptive planet Uranus. For as original and sort of avant-garde and progressive as Uranus can be, it quite frequently, Uranus will be indicative of people who are sectarian, who are fundamentalists, who are extreme or radical in their views, who are defiant. It's hard for us people, who are kind of spiritual New Age types. I'll put myself in that category too. If we are kind of like, we think of Uranus in astrology as a sort of symbol of spiritual evolution, of evolving, getting outside of the box, thinking uniquely, political progressivism. We think about it like that. But we often fail to recognize that Uranus is this guy who sent the pipe bombs, for example, his van or whatever. They showed some pictures of it on CNN. That the van is also an image of a radical individualist. And radical individualists throughout the history of our world are not always nice people, right? And that's the basic thing to remember about Uranus, is that Uranus is also a planet of shock, disruption, sudden violence, and catastrophe. It's not just a planet that frees the prisoners and emancipates those who are enslaved. It is a planet that can also be about political and ideological extremism, individualism that borders on the point of narcissism. So you have to remember the shadow sides of Uranus, and it showed up very powerfully with this full moon. What to speak of the fact that it's both were disposed of in Venus's sign by a Venus that is retrograde in Scorpio, combusts the sun, becoming swallowed up by the fiery sun in a debilitated position in Mars's sign. So you have when people feel like the only way that they can get their message across is through violence, and when you have attacks in peaceful or public places or systems, unfortunately, that is a part of what we saw. So public and civil service, moon, that the attack in and through the postal service. Moon is also related to messengers, as it traditionally has its joy in the third house, which is a house that we often associate with messengers. And then you also think of the attack on peaceful places of worship. That's also Venus. Venus traditionally associated with sanctuaries, with the synagogue, and the attempted attack on a African-American church in the South, I believe it was, and then ended up killing some people in a grocery store. These are Moon-Venus kinds of places where attack is happening. It's not, especially with the full moon conjoining with Uranus. You have a really Uranian full moon. So those are some of the ways that you could see the astrology of last week present. These days I try not to comment on it too quickly. I think the knee-jerk reaction to astrologize tragedy, at least within myself, is problematic. So I try to give it a little time and really sort of absorb it, take it in emotionally, and then when it's appropriate, I'll say something. But again, remember that the planets don't cause these things to happen. You can think of the planets as like the different arms of a karmic clock. It's a very elaborate clock. It has more than two hands on the clock. But as it ticks, karma unfolds. Karma and fate are basically the same thing. We could think of fate as the result of choices that have been made in the past in a way that is more complicated than we can possibly imagine. and that but that is meaningful, and reflects an intelligent, ordered cosmos, but also a participatory one. It's not just a blind mechanical clock. We make choices. The choices unfold in terms of outcomes. The astrology is just basically like a clock in the sky that's showing us at what times, what specific kinds of outcomes are going to be happening. And you can often, though not always, trace them back to different kinds of influences or different kinds of previous events that have been a part of a chain of events. But again, not always. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that not even the most, the wisest of sages understand karma or its workings. But we also have in that, in the Bhagavad Gita, the teaching that the orchestrator of all things is the divine. And so the divine intelligence, or God, if you're comfortable with that word, is ultimately, you can think of as the orchestrator behind all things, even though there's also space for us to be making choices. So we make choices, but the way that the choices result in outcomes and the way that they perpetuate all these multiple narratives that weave together is divinely orchestrated. I believe that most ancient astrologers, based on what we know of ancient astrological texts, believed something like that, if not something very similar to that. So, not saying you have to believe that if you're an astrologer, but that's generally the way that we astrologers look at things. So are the planets causing all of this to happen? No, but they are reflective of, or they are indicators of the unfolding of karma, action and reaction in the world. So important to have a sense ahead of time. What astrology does is it prepares us in the place that matters most, which is, in our hearts. It prepares us for the kinds of things that are going to unfold at certain kinds of times. But even people who know astrology inside and out cannot perfectly predict the way that karma is going to unfold. That's not really the point of astrology anyway. The point, like many forms of divination, is to give us some idea of how things are unfolding so that we may be prepared to walk through karma and destiny with trust, and with a certain degree of surrender, and also with being transcendental on some level, being a spirit soul and not just someone who is completely identified with what's unfolding in the material world around us. There is, in this sense, unexplored riches in every experience when we learn to see it from a transcendental perspective, which is also what astrology allows us to do. So that's, we had that full moon last week really blasted through intensely, as was expected. This is a full moon that was not only moon conjoined with Uranus, opposite Venus retrograde, who's debilitated, combusts the sun like that, but also square to the nodes of the moon. So you had a grand fixed cross square to the nodes of the moon. Very powerful moment, also a kind of crossroads moment between the past and the future, you might say, a moment where there's we're at a crossroads moment right now. And that's not only, just you can see it in your personal life, but you can, and it might sound trite to say that, like, well, what were all the other public shootings we've had in the past decade now, were they all crossroad moments? So the reason that this is a crossroad moment of the square to the nodes is just that when you activate those nodes at the same time, you're getting a sense of there being a choice, of you're being at a crossroads of some kind, a moment of choosing about a way of moving forward or a way of clinging to the past. And there's dangers on either side. The consumptive hunger of something that might make you want to radically alter course and go in a new direction. The North Node might seem very tempting, but be careful, because the North Node is also associated with gains and growth that's not always good for us. Similarly, the South Node, you may want to go into a more austere place, a place of acceptance, a place of sticking with things as they are, doubling down on things. That is maybe a good thing, but sometimes too much austerity or too much, the South Node was associated with Saturn, and kind of could be overly limiting or too conservative somehow. but it's a big choice. It's a big moment. Similarly, you can see in US politics, we're reaching midterm elections, and you have the exact same kind of crossroads split in terms of how people are deciding right now collectively within the US uh, uh, populace, the voters. So anyway, the end of the month here, though, I mean, let's get real. Like, look at what's happening right now. I'll be talking more about this on Halloween, but Venus is also about to hit an opposition to Uranus, and both are square the nodes of the moon, like right now still. So that this moment is not over yet either. There's still intensification of this moment coming through the last quarter moon. The last quarter moon will cross the north node in Leo, and it will activate that same grand cross kind of energy with the nodes that was present at the full moon, and that's coming on Halloween this week. So we still have an intense week ahead. Okay, now I've gotten through everything I wanted to say about last month, about how I personally work with or process these things. It's also really important that we not get too cosmic when things are just human. I've found that astrology frequently can be used as a way of dissociating from our bodies, our lives, our emotions. Being spiritual does not mean that we're here to neglect or ignore the basic empathetic response to life, or a participatory and relational dimension to our existence, right? So again, this is why I think when so much is happening, whether it's personal or collective in the news or whatever, that astrology is helpful, but it's not the thing to go and like hang your identity or your hat on in the midst of a turbulent time. It's much better to breathe. It's much better to exercise, to make sure you get enough sleep and to eat right, to spend time with loved ones, to process emotionally. Astrology is helpful, but it can represent a retreat into your head, and that's not always a good thing. So just something to stay aware of, that the human empathetic response is not something that we get out of through doing astrology. All right, so let's talk about November. November has a lot of interesting stuff to look forward to. I'm going to go through the big stuff. First of all, we get going with the new moon. One of the first big transits of November is a new moon on November 7th in Scorpio. So this new moon comes in about the middle 15 degrees or so Scorpio, so right in the middle, and it has a nice trine to Neptune within a couple of degrees. This new moon in Scorpio means depth, usually will bring a flavor of emotional intensity. Remember that we're in a time of year that all over the world has been associated with depending on your northern southern hemisphere, but it's all over the world has been associated with the bridge of the dead, from between the living and the dead this time of the year. Ancestral connections are strong, and it's a deep yin time of year. So we're going inward. We're visiting the unconscious dimensions of our relationships. We're looking for messages in dreams. We are feeling very deeply into things. We're in a contemplative space. Sometimes we don't savor contemplative spaces well enough, because we're thinking all the time that outcomes, progress, action, forward movement, that all of this is what defines progress. So we think outcomes in the material world, moving forward, getting the job done, coming to decisions, processing information. Think about that. We talk about information and processing like computers. So, in our everyday lives, we'll say, "Oh, I'm still processing that." That implies that we're expecting some outcome. Well, I'm going to process this information, and then I'll have the response, and then I'll have the outcome, or I'll have the action. I'll know what to do. Sometimes we just don't savor contemplative spaces, non-goal oriented, processing, you might say, where we're with something and we spend time with it in the same way that, you know, if you're if you're on a first date and you have a first kiss, you know, there's it that first kiss at that moment of intimacy has a life of its own, you know, and it's if you were to sit there being like, well, good, I've kissed this individual and I had wanted to kiss them. It's a first date. It was a good thing to do on a first date, and so, you know, like mission accomplished. It'd be like, you would be the most boring person, you know, to like make out with, like, in the whole world. Like nobody, you know, like nobody would want to do that. So anyway, you get the point. The Scorpio new moon that's coming through in early November is an invitation to go deep into things, but be careful of the desire to take that and twist it into I can do something with this. Because one of the things that Scorpio is good at is going deep. One of the things that Scorpio sometimes struggles with is sort of trying to co-opt or coerce or manipulate. By going deep, then one can get something that one desires, or one can protect against something that one is afraid of losing. So often Scorpio begins deep, but then ends up sort of twisting the depth to a self-serving purpose. And that's something you have to be really careful of during Scorpio season. So new moon Scorpio, November 7th. Now this new moon is also, you know, something that goes along with this, you could say, is with the trine to Neptune, there is imaginative depth available. So it's a Scorpio new moon will always bring that kind of heavy, deep, contemplative quality to it. But Neptune invites us into an imaginative landscape or a visionary landscape where it may invite us to spiritualize as we deepen into things emotionally. There could also be some level of deception, of gossip, of dishonesty, of betrayal, and the smoke and mirrors of Neptune that's a part of it right now. So you want to be careful that you're not pulling the wool over your own eyes or somebody else's, that you're not being deceived or deceiving. Also you want to be careful of this kind of way of cloaking ourselves, cloaking our real intentions, cloaking our actual motivations for things. But at the same time, emotional honesty, emotional healing, emotional depth, those things are really well indicated by this new moon. So I like this new moon, has a few bewares in it, but otherwise I think it looks pretty good. All month long, Venus is going to be retrograde in Libra now instead of Scorpio. So that actually comes, let's see, I mean, we're looking at that very early on. Let's see here. Yeah, so that happens on Halloween this week. So we're, you know, right on the verge of Venus's retrograde, pushing it out of Scorpio and into Libra. Now, what you need to know about that is that all month long, you're going to have Venus retrograde in the sign of Libra now. This is a totally different mood for Venus retrograde because now she's in her own sign. So she's in her own power. It's a little bit more empowered Venus retrograde. What to speak of the fact that she's now starting to emerge as the morning star. So Venus-related things are starting to individuate a bit, whereas Venus-related things were sort of dying, collapsing, melting down, changing, transforming. As Venus just this past week hit the conjunction with the sun, there's a moment of rebirth. And so Venus-related things, whether that's beauty, friendship, agreements, love, romance, sexuality, sensuality, art, things that are things related to health or cleanliness, those things that have been sort of going into the death stage are now starting to reemerge. And as it reemerges, the main thing to think about is that now it's in its own power in Libra. It's also being tremendously energized all month long by Uranus in Aries. Now it's out, you know, Uranus is going to be moving out of Taurus. Let's see when that happens. I'm trying to remember exact dates here, but so Uranus leaves Taurus between the 7th, November 6th and 7th. So right around the same time as the new moon. So when you put that together, you have a Venus that is in a Venus that's coming into her own as the morning star. The morning star is more yang-like position for Venus. So Venus in her masculine sign, in her own power, opposing Uranus in that fiery, domicile of Mars all month long, arising as the morning star. Venus is ready to assert something now, and it's going to be gradually taking hold and grabbing more momentum as the month goes on. Then finally turns direct around November 17th. And that's the time where you're going to see this revisionary process, the Venus kind of with a head of steam saying, okay, now I'm ready to implement something. I'm ready for this new agreement, a new deal, a new revision, a new style, a new appearance. And I'm ready to start. I've gathered everything together, and now I'm ready to start putting it forward into the world. Changes in relationships become more substantive. Changes in relationships become more final, more defined or definitive. Things that have been picked up during this Venus retrograde period that have been too quick, too early, too fast. As Venus turns direct within the opposition to Uranus, you're also going to find that those things that you picked up as easy solutions or quick fixes, something will go wrong with them. You get a new wardrobe, you may stain your clothes. You get a new relationship, you may find out you were too impulsive. You amended an agreement impulsively. You may find out that need to re-amend again. But this is a time also where implementing lessons learned in relationships, lessons learned about love and beauty and sexuality, and this is a time where things can start to roll forward, and Venus is really in a pretty empowered position especially from November 17th onward. However, don't forget that on November 30th, at the very end of the month, just like on Halloween at the end of this month, the end of November, Venus is going to oppose Uranus again. So this process of Venus has also been about there's been a theme of transforming Venus-related things, especially agreements, relationships, bonds between people, or specifically the karmas of our relationships. But there's also been a theme of breaking free, of individuality, of independence, and that's being fueled by Uranus. The extremes as well. Extremes that Venus has been dealing with. If you think of Venus as the beauty of the public, the sort of public sanctuary of a synagogue or of a public square or something like that, you're thinking of Uranus also as the disruption to that beauty, to that cleanliness, forcing us to look more deeply below the surface of things. So getting into situations where you're uncomfortable, and yet there is a power to transform you based on the disruptiveness of some kind of sacred or beautiful space. The polished veneer is disturbed, and you have to look at the ugliness below it. Even though that might sound a little Plutonian, it's actually also really Uranian, because Uranus, when it opposes things, is also especially Venus, which has so much to do with beauty, is trying to disrupt and disarm, dismantle the sort of status quo of what Venus represents. So you go to natural opposites of Venus to see what the disruption might yield. You're in a relationship, you think it's really nice, Uranus disrupts, shows you that something is there below the surface, which causes you to need to revise or sort of amend the relationship on some level. So you think about disturbing or disruptive things in Venus territory for the next month still. And again, on November 30th, Venus opposes Uranus one last time. And then you see, then there's like a real moment of transformation that's happening even beyond Venus turning direct. So a lot ahead for Venus in the next month. But again, across Libra, Aries, it's a lot more assertive. And Venus in the morning star position, you're going to be looking much more at how it's a lot less sort of emotionally melded and sort of deep and emotionally intense. It's as it was when Venus was in Scorpio. This is a bit more about striking balance, about asserting oneself, one's ideas or ideals, one's message, the themes of independence versus dependence, but sometimes it's a little bit more contractual or intellectual in Libra. So you think about some of those things rather than the Scorpio themes. All right, so the big theme for November that I'm actually really stoked about, and that our next and final guest speaker in the Nightlight Seasonal Speaker Series is going to be talking about tomorrow night, is the entrance of Jupiter into Sagittarius. Jupiter's entering Sagittarius on November 8th. This is awesome because Jupiter in Scorpio over the past year has been deep, and the learning that we've been going through has been about learning vis-a-vis death, learning vis-a-vis depth. All good. I love that. But let's face it, there's nothing like Jupiter in Sagittarius. If you've ever, just go back to every 12-year increments between 2006 and 2007. For example, between 2006 and 2007, in my own life, I was starting in on a writing project called Reality Sandwich. Reality Sandwich is a popular web magazine or people who are interested in sort of the evolution of consciousness or consciousness studies, psychedelics, countercultural art and music and its relationship to spirituality. So I was starting in, that project was getting launched and I was starting in on it. Why do I mention that with Jupiter and Sagittarius? Because it's in its own rulership, and Jupiter can really be like itself and affect powerful change in a truly Jupiterian way when it's in its home sign. It's like you being in your own house and you want to get things done. Like you've got all your resources available to you and you're the one in charge of them, right? So Jupiter and Sagittarius, hope, faith, adventure, expansion, truth, optimism. Those are things that come a lot more naturally than they have in the past couple of years. We've had, Jupiter in Virgo, Libra, Scorpio. Those are some heavy autumnal places, right? And now we're getting into a place for, first of all, debilitated in Virgo and Mercury's sign. Then you go into Libra. There's all different kinds of themes about justice and balance and the Me Too thing, like that. And then you're getting into Scorpio, things really deep, intense. Now we're hitting Sagittarius, and this is a place where Jupiter can be a lot more productive and expansive. Now, of course, that can also mean, people who are puffed up, arrogant, proud, sort of Zeus on steroids or whatever. Like things can get a little bit more like pompous or whatever. People can become more inflamed or sort of fired up about what they believe. Not that we necessarily need any more of that, right? But Jupiter in Sagittarius is a bit like in the United States here, at least I grew up celebrating Christmas. It's a bit like the holiday spirit or the Christmas spirit, you could say. Let's just say the holiday spirit in general. It's that feeling of looking to the future. Yes, you're in the darkest time of year, so to speak, but you're looking over the horizon and you're saying, like, where can we go from here? What is the next big vision? I invite you guys to join us for Sean Nygaard's talk tomorrow night, where you'll hear, several hours worth of Sean exploring the archetypal meaning of Jupiter and Sagittarius, and that should reignite some hope and good cheer within us. Because, I think honestly, people in my experience, looking back at my last Jupiter and Sag period coming out of Jupiter and Scorpio, you don't even realize how faithful and exciting and aspirational Jupiter and Sagittarius is unless you do a little healthy comparing a few months in to what things were like when Jupiter is in Scorpio. So it's like, this is a great time for Jupiter. No offense to anyone who really loves Jupiter and Scorpio, but it's a time that it's a bit more like the dark, shadowy nighttime meditation on impermanence, and the way that wisdom comes through a meditation like that, Jupiter and Scorpio. Jupiter and Sag is, it's a bit more like a jolly sleigh ride. You know what I mean? It has that feeling of being able to lift you up and inspire you and fill you with a sense that there's a meaningful cosmos that you're participating in. There is cosmic order. There's a plan. we can really rekindle your faith and hope. So I'm really excited about that one. Now, I haven't mentioned a lot of the sort of shadow sides of keeping it a little bit light. But again, tune into Sean's talk tomorrow night, because I think you'll get a lot out of it and get a little bit more than what I'm able to briefly cover. But Jupiter's entrance into Sagittarius on November 8th is a big deal, really exciting. Now, November 15th, I'm ready to do a dance about this one. Mars will finally be leaving Aquarius. If you can believe it, Mars has been in Aquarius since the middle of May, minus a brief interlude via retrograde into late Capricorn toward the end of August, beginning of September. But literally, we have not had Mars out of Aquarius for a very long time. So November 15th, Mars changes signs and moves into Pisces. Now, one of the reasons I love Mars in Pisces is because this is basically, I like to think of it as it's where you can basically find ways of asserting yourself, or being assertive, that somehow manage at best to still be hopeful, inspiring, compassionate, empathetic, emotionally sensitive. So it's I find that it's a great time to get things done, but to get them done in a really sensitive manner. So Mars changing signs into Pisces around November 15th, you may, a significant shift of energy. When Mars is in an air sign for a really long time, it's we don't even recognize the level at which we're doing everything that we're doing conceptually, or more mentally, or more intellectually. It's a little bit more of a dissociative Mars in that regard. We're moving through things in a more principled manner, and in a sort of blocky and chunky way. This is a Saturn-ruled sign. When Mars moves into Pisces, a lot more sort of fluid. However, Mars in Pisces also a little bit of the martyr thing going on. I'm going to die for what I believe in. I'm going to, the victim, savior, martyr, Christ complexes can all get pretty intense with Mars in Pisces. But, again, I think it's a potential to get a lot of things done with a heightened degree of sensitivity for others. So that's coming. And then on November 19th, Mars will square Jupiter. That can be a very productive and sort of confidence building transit, where you got Mars, the planet of the god of war, but in a very faithful Jupiter oriented sign, uplifting, emotionally, sensitive. And then it's moving into a square with Jupiter, its ruler. Mars will be in Pisces, which is Jupiter's sign. So it hits a square to its ruler, which means it has reception with its ruler. And its ruler in its own sign can really help. So you're looking at a very productive, sort of bold, confident, inspiring, feeling like you're, kind of feeling of being bigger than life, or raising your confidence. Of course, there can also be some delusions of grandeur, some sense of being puffed up, too big for your britches kind of thing. But this is definitely a transit between the 15th and 19th with Mars and Jupiter that will activate, that will energize, that will be expansive and action-oriented, but also emotionally rich and filled with an aura of enthusiasm. I'm excited because that's about the time that I'll be launching my annual fundraiser. Well, just a little preview for you guys. Every year for the last 40 days of the year, I fundraise to help support the writing of all my horoscopes and all the video production that I do for the year ahead. So last year we had a little over 300 backers for my Kickstarter, and we raised about $50,000. That money went to helping build our yoga studio, community herbal medicine garden. It sent me on a East Meets West astrology conference trip to India. You guys have helped. I really rely on my readers not only to try and help me earn a living, but also to help me meet goals and develop and expand the work that I do so that more people can be served, from scholarships for people in my programs to, again, we built a community herbal medicine garden on our land, to helping us build out a new yoga studio when our building and lease came under threat. You guys have been totally awesome in supporting not only my work, but my wife and our yoga studio's work through my annual Kickstarter. I'll be doing that again the last 40 days of the year, where I enter into a more intense period of prayer and daily sadhana to be focused for the year ahead as well. So I will be launching my Kickstarter during that time, which is also pretty exciting. I think I'm going to be pretty pumped up about it. All right, so November 17th, if you're not tired of retrogrades already, you'll get more. Mercury will be turning retrograde in Sagittarius, which is a debilitated place for Mercury because this is Jupiter's sign. Mercury loves to contest, argue, debate, challenge. Mercury used to be related, for example, to sporting events because of the back and forth nature of people running up and down a court or a field. Mercury also is related to things that go back and forth. So Mercury is more contesting, debating, arguing, going back and forth with things. Jupiter more about building larger wholes, saying yes, confirmation, support, unity, growth, expansion. So when Jupiter's in Mercury signs or Mercury is in Jupiter signs, they struggle a little bit. They struggle to find that balance or to integrate those themes. It's an opportunity, of course, for unique synthesis between those kind of archetypal qualities. But for example, Mercury in Sagittarius sometimes struggles with philosophical or spiritual doubt, like really going through some kind of doubt, wanting to say yes to something, but getting hung up on all sorts of mental stuff. And maybe the mental stuff shouldn't really be there. You should just be putting your faith into something, but I can't. I've got all these questions. Or on the other hand, you want to just have faith in something, but the details are there and you have to deal with them, and so the doubt is constructive, even though it's also difficult. Nobody loves having that person who questions things at a party, you know what I mean? But sometimes, if it weren't for that person questioning things, the confidence and the momentum could take everyone into a really bad trip, a really bad experience because of a lack of careful thinking or careful planning. So those kind of themes, the back and forth, will be pronounced during Mercury's retrograde starting on November 17th. But this retrograde also features a square from Mercury to Neptune. Oh, wow. So that really complicates things, because when there's the other place that Mercury really struggles is Pisces. That's the place where it's in its fall. And that's, of course, where Neptune is right now. So there is also a process that's going to be happening from mid-November, into December with Mercury and Neptune that says, do I have all the facts straight? Am I seeing things clearly? Am I confused? Am I deluding myself? Am I being deceptive? Am I projecting or presenting myself in a way that's honest or dishonest? So all kinds of questions about, or you could call it a clarification process, a mental, maybe even spiritual, existential crisis, a little mini crisis, where we are trying to get clear from within the fog and haze of Neptune. Or on the other hand, it could be about a moment where there's a certain level of mental and intellectual surrender that's necessary. Your mind is being subsumed or is being consumed by your emotions or your emotional responses, your intelligence. You think you're being really rational, but it's being sort of co-opted by a larger enthusiasm and a depth of emotion that you can't contain or control, even if your intelligence is telling you should get a little better handle on it. Also the square to Neptune can also mean that there's meltdowns or changes with regard to speech, communication in relationships, ideological or intellectual conflicts, and the way that those conflicts dissolve or experience healing. That could also be pronounced. You may also see with Mercury, Neptune, basically themes where your sense of needing to be right is trumped by the need to empathize with others, or the need to know what you believe is allowed. You're allowing yourself to have some kind of space of healthy questioning, uncertainty, and contemplation. But all those kinds of things will be more intense. In the collective, you can expect to see issues, maybe issues related to truth and truth telling, maybe issues around security and cyber threats, things like that. You can also think about, generally speaking, revisions or changes to technology. Keep all glasses of water away from your keyboard, around that time. You could see dissolution or changes to different forms of technology or communication devices. You can think about ways that information or media are being manipulated in order to get a message across. You can think about distortions of information that serve selfish agendas. These all can be pronounced during this Mercury retrograde. But otherwise, I think it's a great Mercury retrograde for the exploration of our ideas, beliefs. It's great for learning and for opening the mind to basically new horizons or new imaginative depths. Okay, so that's Mercury's retrograde in a square with Neptune. On the 22nd into the 23rd of November, the full moon in Gemini is going to oppose the Sun and Jupiter in Sagittarius. So that has that real Mercury-Jupiter dynamic going on with the full moon. A lot of, you put the two against each other. Again, you have the sort of analytical, intelligent, communicative qualities, rational, back and forth, debating, skeptical, but also messengers, relaying messages, communicating messages, breaking things down, explaining things, translating things, interpreting things. That's all really pronounced with the full moon in Gemini, but it's opposed to Jupiter and the Sun in Sagittarius. Here's the message that I want. This is the agenda. This is the doctrine. This is the dogma. This is the belief. This is the, the authority. This is the truth. So those two things are in a real tension around the 22nd and 23rd, and they're creating a T-square with with Mars in Pisces. So you're also going to have a really, intellectual, spiritual, philosophical, or ideological tensions that are fueled by an emotional agenda. There's an agenda that Mars has in the middle, and it's asking us to make difficult decisions, possibly ethical decisions around information and how it's presented, or around how we try to assert our agenda or our ideas. But that's going to be really intense toward the end of the month. That full moon, it comes right around Thanksgiving. And then finally, toward the very end of the month, November 25th into the 26th, remember November 30th, you have Venus opposite Uranus, but November 25th into the 26th, Jupiter and the Sun will conjoin in Sagittarius. So there's a real powerful moment of rebirth for Jupiter as it enters Sag, and then as the Sun conjoins it. Right now, it's an old Jupiter. The Sun is about to conjoin Jupiter, which means Jupiter's at the very end of its life cycle with the Sun. So you're thinking of a really powerful moment of rebirth for Jupiter coming up toward the end of the month of November. And this moment has, the Cazimi especially, into the 26th, there's a sense of an empowered perspective, an empowered sense of truth, an empowered philosophical position, empowered sense of hope or optimism about the future. Also, potentially ideas about who our teachers or mentors are, or who we want them to be, and how teachers, mentors, or spiritual teachings play a role in our life. That could be very pronounced, especially toward the end of the month, and probably in a way that could be really clarifying. Again, not without some complications from that full moon energy, but the idea that I get from this month is gradually a return of a sense of philosophical, moral directive, and maybe a little bit of a questioning process that we have to go through in order to get there, but some healthy adjustment of where we're heading in life and how it aligns with our philosophical or spiritual beliefs, whether that's in work, relationships, with parenting, with anything. So that's what I'm getting for the overall mood of this month, with also a strong dose of the Venus opposite Uranus theme all month. The things that we consider beautiful, sacred, especially relational, are being challenged to individuate and step forward a little bit more. But there'll also be there will be challenges, things that try to disturb or disrupt the Venusian status quo in our lives. So that's also a big theme for November. So forewarned is forearmed. We are ready to go into a month ahead with greater sense of what to expect. I hope that this has been helpful. I'm going to now take a look at what's coming, or what questions you guys have. Oh, by the way, I have to say, I'm going to be talking probably a little bit on Halloween about Venus opposite Uranus in greater depth. Should make for some really interesting Halloween costumes. I keep thinking about that. I'm like, I feel like I'm going to see like more Halloween, revelry than usual with this Venus opposite Uranus happening on Halloween. All right. Michael has some comments about being born in Pittsburgh, and some comments there that are really interesting. I will just read those later, Michael. Thank you. Let's see. Crazy news coming out of Brazil. Yeah, they elected some ultra-conservative guy or something. I think I heard about that. I think that's what happened. I hope I'm getting that right, but the thing that's vibrating with electricity on my shelf is a reflection of the ceiling fan that's on right now in photograph that I have framed. No Kundalini projections from my aura. Okay. I love Jupiter in Scorpio, but I have unstructured everything I can think. I feel like this full moon graduated me from the last 10 months. I'm ready to move forward. Cool. Right. You ready for a sleigh ride? Good. I try to, let's get everyone on board a sleigh ride. That was really the purpose of today, was to recruit everybody for a sleigh ride. Okay, good. Well, I don't see any other questions. So thank you guys very much for listening. I hope you have a beautiful week. Look forward to my written horoscopes, and look forward to the individual sun sign horoscope videos dropping in the next couple of days. All right, take care, everyone.